I didn't say when, but the answer is, look, Chicago's very interesting because I watched Pritzker get up and say we don't need help, we're safe. But 2 weeks ago, they had 6 people murdered, and they had 24 people hit by bullets. Well, we're going in. I didn't say when, we're going in. When you lose, look, I have an obligation. This isn't a political thing. I have an obligation.
Welcome back to Way Too Early. It's just before 5:30 here on the East Coast, 2:30 out west. I'm Ali Vitale. And that, of course, was President Trump doubling down on his plan to send National Guard troops to Chicago. In response, Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois called Trump unhinged and said federal intervention was neither needed nor wanted.
I want to address the president's unhinged remarks a few minutes ago, begging me to call him. No, I will not call the president, asking him to send troops to Chicago. I've made that clear already. I'm aware that the president of the United States likes to go on television and beg me to call and ask him for troops. I find this extraordinarily strange, as Chicago does not want troops on our streets. I also have experience asking the president for assistance, just to have the rug pulled out from underneath me when execution meets reality. I refuse to play a reality game show with Donald Trump again.
But then listen closely to hear to what Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson is saying, because he's criticizing Trump for failing to focus on illegal gun trafficking in Chicago.
We need the federal government to stop the endless flow of guns into our state and into our city. The vast majority of guns do not come from Chicago. They are not made in Cook County. They are not bought in the state of Illinois. These guns come from red states. They are coming from Indiana. They are coming from Mississippi. They are coming from Louisiana. And that is the harsh reality, whether Republicans like it or not. Occupying our city will do nothing to solve this problem.
This president doesn't care about gun violence. He just wants his own secret police force that will do publicity stunts whenever his poll numbers are sinking, whenever his jobs report shows a stagnating economy, whenever he needs another distraction from his failures. That's what this is about.
It's important to underscore what you're hearing there from top officials in Illinois and Chicago specifically. They're not saying there's no role the federal government can play here that won't help us. They're saying there are things you can focus on, gun violence prevention specifically. But what they're saying specifically, too, is there is no role for troops here that will make the situation on the ground better. There's a difference. Meanwhile, in California, a federal judge ruled President Trump violated federal law when he deployed the National Guard to Los Angeles early this year. In June, the Trump administration sent 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines to the city after thousands of people took to the streets in protest of the president's immigration policies. Now, a U.S. district judge says the deployment breached an 1878 law that prohibits the president from using the military as a domestic police force without congressional approval. California officials had argued the use of the National Guard created fear and disrupted civilian life. Lawyers for the Justice Department claimed the troops were just protecting federal property and personnel. Joining us now, former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Lisa, this L.A. ruling is likely to factor into whatever happens on the ground with Chicago now, because Pritzker is doing exactly what Newsom did in California, saying we don't want troops here, and Trump is saying I'm going to do it anyway over your objections. Talk about how the legal plays with the political now here.
Well, you know, Ellie, it's interesting because looking at it politically, you can't help but see the similarities between the two situations. And yet, legally, what this court has decided in San Francisco does not formally impact the Trump administration's ability to do so in Chicago, and will not formally prevent them from doing so unless and until the Supreme Court rules. So I would expect the Trump administration to continue pushing the envelope in Chicago and continue down the same path that President Trump promised. Why? Because what this judge says in San Francisco, even if upheld by a federal court of appeals, will not have an actual legal effect on what the law is in Chicago, what the law is in Illinois. Those are two separate federal appeals courts. And in fact, what the Trump administration might be hoping for is what we call a circuit split, where two federal appeals courts decide differently, and then you have no choice but to get the Supreme Court involved. They're going to try and do this in as many different places as they can until and unless they are blocked by courts with actual jurisdiction in the places where they're doing it.
So because of that legal backdrop that you just so skillfully set up, how should governors respond to the administration's efforts to send troops to their cities? We watched the way that Newsom did it and the resulting court battle there. What could Pritzker do here to set up a court battle that's similar but different and kind of gets to the same end of potentially trying to limit Trump's ability to send troops here?
Well, Pritzker, as well as the Attorney General for Illinois, would be well served, I think, to start a similar lawsuit in Chicago federal courts, trying to enjoin the use of military for immigration-related enforcement on the same basis that Governor Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta were so successful in doing in California. And there, they don't just have a preliminary injunction, they now have a permanent injunction that means that President Trump cannot use troops even to protect federal property or personnel with respect to immigration enforcement until a federal appeals court says essentially that that's okay. Now, that ruling doesn't take effect until September 12th to give the Trump administration an opportunity to go to an appeals court and seek a stay. But if I were Governor Pritzker and his attorney general, what I would do is look to Newsom and Bonta and try and imitate that same lawsuit in the federal courts in front of me in Chicago and also then in the Seventh Circuit, which oversees Illinois.
So, Lisa, that was a key ruling that broke late yesterday, but it was far from the only one. It's lucky that we have you on a morning like this, because overnight, a federal appeals court ruled against President Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. He used it to rapidly deport Venezuelan migrants that he alleges are suspected gang members. Earlier this year, Trump issued a proclamation to invoke the act to fast-track the deportations process. The president saying it was necessary in cases concerning Venezuelans suspected of being gang members because of his words, mass illegal migration. The Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals said in its ruling it would grant a preliminary injunction to prevent removal because we find no invasion or predatory incursion had occurred. But, Lisa, are there any other legal maneuvers here that the administration might make to circumvent this latest deportation ruling?
Absolutely, Allie, because this ruling only applies to the Alien Enemies Act. What it says is that they can't use the AEA to deport alleged members of Tren de Aragua from Texas to Venezuela. But that doesn't mean that other legal authorities and other immigration statutes aren't available to them. The other thing that I would point out to people looking at this is that the dissent here is as important as that two-judge majority opinion. The reason why is it's written by a guy named Andrew Oldham. Expect to hear that name a lot more in the months to come. Judge Oldham is expected to be among the frontrunners for any Supreme Court seat that President Trump has to fill, and his dissent, which he says represents the first time in the 227 years of the nation's history that a president has been blocked from using the AEA in very strong terms, reads to me more like an audition than a legal opinion.
It's really important context that you bring in there. MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, thank you as always.